Fun fact about me, some of you don't know, I thought I was going to be a high school history teacher. That's what I thought. Like, I did not know when I went to college that I was going to end up being a pastor, didn't know I was going to end up being your pastor. Had no idea. I thought I was going to be a high school history teacher because I love history. I'm a history nerd. Represent, if you're a history nerd, who are you? The other two or three? Oh, there's more. All right, so, the rest of you, you're going to get the history lesson anyway. So don't check out like you're going to get it. I've been excited about getting to this particular chapter because I am a history what? Nerd. Yeah, that's me. So when you read Daniel chapter 8, you're reading some really interesting history stuff. You're reading, of course, God's Word, but you're reading some really fascinating history, some things that we're going to get into today. So I'm going to read to us Daniel chapter 8, verses 1. I'll start out 1 to 16. And again, it's another vision, so prepare yourself. It's a little bit weird. We already admitted last week that the second half of Daniel is weird with monsters and visions and animals and angels and all kinds of stuff. Very different than the first half of Daniel. And you're going to see that again here in Daniel chapter 8 as he's having yet another vision. So here it is. Let me read it to you. In the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after that which appeared to me at the first. He's talking about last week's sermon. And I saw in the vision, and when I saw, I was in Susa the citadel, which is in the province of Elam, and I saw in the vision, and I was at the Ulai canal. I raised my eyes and saw, and behold, a ram standing on the bank of the canal. It had two horns, and both horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. I saw the ram charging westward and northward and southward. No beast could stand before him, and there was no one who could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased and became great. And as I was considering, behold, a male goat came from the west across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground. Always makes me think of a floating goat, without touching the ground. And the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. He came to the ram with the two horns, which I had seen standing on the bank of the canal, and he ran at him in his powerful wrath. I saw him come close to the ram, and he was enraged against him and struck the ram and broke his two horns. And the ram had no power to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground and trampled on him. I hope you're getting a good visual of what this vision must have looked like. I should have had some reenactment in here. And there was no one who could rescue the ram from his power. Then the goat became exceedingly great. So first the ram, now the goat. But when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and instead of it, there came up four conspicuous horns toward the four winds of heaven. Out of one of them came a little horn, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, toward the glorious land. That's the promised land. That's Israel. It grew great even to the host of heaven. And some of the host and some of the stars it threw down to the ground and trampled on them. It became great, even as great as the prince of the host, and the regular burnt offering was taken away from him, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown. And a host will be given over to it, together with the regular burnt offering, because of transgression, and it will throw truth to the ground, and it will act and prosper. Then I heard a Holy One speaking, angel in Daniel's vision. And another Holy One said, so two angels talking to each other, said to the one who spoke, for how long is the vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes desolate, and the giving over of the sanctuary and host to be trampled underfoot? And he said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary will be restored to its rightful state. When I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I sought to understand it, and behold, there stood before me one having the appearance of a man, and I heard a man's voice between the banks of the Ulai, and it called Gabriel. Yeah, that's the same angel Gabriel, visits Mary 400, 500 years later. Gabriel, make this man understand the vision. This is the word of the Lord. I mean, it's weird, but this is the word of the Lord. I mean, it just is. It just is. When I was a kid, I had a friend named Eric, and I was jealous of Eric for one particular reason. I was jealous because in December, I got to open presents on one day. My friend Eric got to open presents on 8 days. And I just didn't understand it. And I thought it was unfair, I didn't understand it. Why did he get to open presents on 8 days in December when I only got 1 day to open presents? Why do you think he did? Because he was Jewish. What was he celebrating? Hanukkah. I had no idea at the time what Hanukkah meant. All I knew was Eric would come to school and tell me what gift he got, like day after day after day after day, while I was still waiting for Christmas to roll around to go ahead and get my gift. I didn't know until much later what Hanukkah was. Hanukkah was the rededication of the temple 165 years before Jesus came. There was an evil ruler in charge of all the area of Syria, all the area of Israel, and he was cruel. More on him in just a minute. He was cruel. How do you say his name? Antiochus. I worked on that all week. Antiochus the Fourth. Okay, wicked guy, an ancient Hitler type guy. Hated the Jews. Mass murdered many. Did horrible things. And help me, Rob. What's his name? Antiochus! I'm going to point at Rob every time I get to say that. Antiochus! Why is this so difficult? Why are words? I speak for a living. This is amazing. Antiochus was a wicked, wicked guy. He was in charge of that area. He had defiled the temple. More on that in just a few minutes, what he actually did. And the Jews rose up against him in what's called the Maccabean Revolt. And they won, and they came to the temple, and when they came into the temple, it had been unused for years. The sacrificial system was no longer allowed to be in place. The priests were all kicked out by Antiochus, that guy, Big A kicked them all out. And then when he came in here, they actually said there were weeds growing up. I mean, it was just in total disarray. So they cleaned up the temple in 165 BC. They cleaned up the temple after they won, after they pushed out Antiochus and his army after they won. And then they realized that the candlestick hadn't been lit. So they went and they found 1 barrel of oil. And they said, well, I guess this is it until we get some more. They needed some special kind of oil. They lit what we call a menorah. They lit the candle, and it lasted not 1 day, what they thought it would. It lasted how many? How many of you know this? 8 days. Hanukkah. Why am I telling you this story about Hanukkah? Why am I telling you this story about my friend Eric who got more gifts than I did? Because Daniel saw Hanukkah 350-something years before it happened. It's incredible. The vision that he has, the detail that he has, incredible. Last week, we had to be a little bit more timid in our guesses on our educated guesses, but our guesses on what these monsters and these beasts meant, and the leopard with 4 heads and wings, and the bear that was hunched over, Cocaine Bear, that guy, the lion that had the wings. We had to be more careful because we didn't have a whole lot of detail. We can make educated guesses based on theology and history, what that meant. This week, we don't have to make those guesses at all because Gabriel actually tells Daniel exactly what this vision means. And I'm so grateful that he did. It makes my job a lot easier. So grateful that he did. He tells him what it means. So you don't wonder who the ram is. You don't wonder who the goat is. In just a minute, I'm going to go ahead and show you that he actually comes out and tells him. But it's common for us to understand, as I said last week, that it's been common for history, all of history, to use animals to represent nations. You know, the bald eagle, you know, things like that. That represents what? Yeah, United States of America. You know, if I say elephant, you know that's Republican. If I say donkey, you know that's Democrat. Like, we've used this kind of language for political and for national stuff for forever. So even back in this day, the people from Greece were known as the goat people. And the Persians and the Medes were known to have a ram on their helmets. Certainly their officers did in their military. So these pictures were known back then of who these people are. And so Gabriel, thankfully, just comes right out and he tells Daniel what this means. And here, let me just read to you verses 20 to 25. This comes after our text. He clearly says this is what it means. So I'm going to tell you what this means. As for the ram, verse 20, that you saw with the two horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia. So he flat out tells them. So at this point, Daniel's still in Babylon, the Babylonian Empire. It's going to end soon. It's going to end soon, real soon. But he's still in it. So he is getting a vision of what's coming next. It's the Medes and the Persians. So Gabriel says that's what's coming next is the rams. And they certainly did. They did all that stuff. They went west, north, south. They did all the things that we just read about in the beginning of Daniel that the ram did. And the two horns, that's the two kingdoms, the Medes and the Persians. And the Persians ended up being greater than the Medes. That's why the Persians who came after were even bigger than the Medes. And so he flat out tells you what that means. As for the ram that you saw with the two horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia. And the goat is the king of Greece. So you don't even have to wonder, what does that goat mean in Daniel chapter 8? Greece. What does that ram mean in Daniel chapter 8? The Medes and the Persians. You don't even have to wonder because Gabriel gives this information. So these are the kings. The goat is the king of Greece. And the great horn between his eyes is the first king. That's Alexander the Great. So he conquered the known land then, all the way from Greece to India, and then they say he sat down and wept because he had no more land to conquer. So that's Alexander the Great. He's the king, the great horn between his eyes. And for the horn that was broken, in place of which four others arose, four kingdoms shall rise out of his nation. And this is where, if you are like me, a history nerd, this is helping you right now. If you're not a history nerd, let me help you with this. Alexander the Great died when he was like 32 or 33 in Babylon. Some people say he got malaria. Some people say he was poisoned. I actually read one scholar who said they think he drank too much and choked on his own vomit in the middle of the night, which would make him one of like the early rock stars, because that seems to be what happens to a lot of rock and roll stars. So it seems like that was it. Well, he dies suddenly, and his kingdom is left in the hands of four generals who divide up Greece. This is all super exciting, you guys, right? Yeah. Oh, yeah. History. And so that's what happened here. The first horn was broken. That's Alexander the Great. And in place of the four others, four kingdoms arise out of his nation. This couldn't be any clearer. But not with his power. Not as great as him. And at the latter end of their kingdom, when the transgressors had reached their limit, a king of bold face, who understands riddles, shall arise. His power shall be great, but not by his own power. This is Antiochus. Did I say it right? Antiochus. This is going to be the worst sermon ever, because this is all they're going to remember, Rob. Remember when Dan couldn't pronounce that guy's name? Antiochus. This is Antiochus. He kind of came to rule that area deceitfully. His brother died under suspicious circumstances, and his nephew was being held hostage in Rome. And so Antiochus comes to the throne, and he's this guy who is deceitful. His power shall be great, but not by his own power. He shall cause fearful destruction, and shall succeed in what he does, and destroy mighty men and the people who are the saints. By his cunning he shall make deceit prosper under his hand, and in his own mind he shall become what? Great. He thinks he's great. Antiochus took a name, Epiphanes. That's the end of his, and in fact, he called himself Theos Antiochus Epiphanes. I should get extra credit for getting that out. Which means the revealed illustrious God Antiochus. Like, that's the name. Would you like to meet me? I am the illustrious God Antiochus Epiphanes was the name that he took for himself. The Jews called him something different. They didn't call him Epiphanes. They didn't call him that at all. They changed it just a wee bit. I can't even pronounce it. Doesn't matter. To the madman. Like, that's what they called him. This guy was bad news. He was bad news. Here's just a small sample of what Antiochus Epiphanes did to the Jews. He murdered a lot of them. In fact, he attacked a bunch of them on the Sabbath, thinking they're not going to fight back because it's the Sabbath. He took out all of his political frustrations. He tried to go to Egypt and conquer some land, and it didn't work out for him, so he came back, and he took out all of his frustration on the people of God, on the Jews. He murdered many of them. He put a lot of them in slavery. He outlawed circumcision and celebrating the Passover. Like, these are things that he did. He burned Torah scrolls. So he found the Bible and burned it. This is what he did, Antiochus Epiphanes. He did this. And then one of the greatest insulting things he did was he took a pig and he had it sacrificed on the altar in the temple. I mean, can you imagine how the Jews felt when they saw Antiochus Epiphanes sacrificing a pig on the altar of God in the Holy of Holies? I mean, can you imagine that? That's what he did. It's the kind of guy he was. He was an evil, ancient Hitler. He was indeed an Antichrist and a foreshadow of the Antichrist. Hated the people of God. Outlawed worship, outlawed the sacrificial system, put up a statue of Zeus in God's temple. And man, there was a priest and his 5 sons, we call them the Maccabees. They weren't having any of it. They weren't having any of it. It's to try to understand how the Jews must have felt at this time. About 50 years ago, in a Jewish cemetery in London, some of you may have read about this, some of you don't remember this, but some of you may have read about this. Some people broke into the cemetery and they went and found all of the Jewish headstones and they put swastikas on them all. Anybody ever read about that? It's terrible. It happened in London 50 years ago. Absolutely awful. That feeling of how awful that is pales in comparison to how this felt when Antiochus Epiphanes had a pig slaughtered on the altar of God. And then one scholar says he took the juices that came out of the pig and began to sprinkle them on the important items of God's house. It was him. Oh, that was him. That's what he did. And Daniel sees all of this happening. He sees it, and the Maccabean revolt happens, and Antiochus Epiphanes' side loses, and for a very brief moment, the people of Israel have their freedom again until the Iron Army of Rome rolls in, and then they're no longer free. But in that moment, that's when Hanukkah happens. That's when they go into the temple. That's when they restore the temple. That's when the 8 days of the menorah are lit. That is when that happens. And Antiochus Epiphanes, when he hears about this, guess what? He hears about this. He's on another one of his campaigns to try to attack somebody else. When he hears about this, he dies. Not by human hand. Just like we're told at the end of verse 25. Without warning, he will destroy many. He'll rise up against the Prince of Princes, and he shall be broken, but by no human hand. Daniel saw all this 350 years before it happened. Absolutely incredible prophecy. I read a lot of Sherlock Holmes, and you should too. And so often, Sherlock Holmes sees things and knows things that other people don't know, that when he's describing them to people, when he's interviewing people and when he's talking to suspects or he's talking to other people, he describes so much in detail what happened that somebody will say to him, inevitably, where were you hiding? Like, where were you hiding to see all this? Of course, he wasn't. He was just using his detective skills to figure it out. People still say this about Daniel. I have read and heard so many people say there's no way Daniel knew this. This is incredible that he knew this, that it had to have been written after it happened. Had to have been written after it happened. It couldn't possibly have been 350 years before it happened, but it was. It was. What an example, a remarkable example of the accuracy of prophecy. But that's not even the main point. That's just interesting history nerd stuff, right? Are you all now history nerds? You came in here not one, you're leaving a history nerd who can't pronounce names of people in the Old Testament. I'm sorry. It's my gift to you. That's not even the most amazing thing about this passage. The most amazing thing about this passage is that it shows God's providential care over all of history and all of God's people. I mean, you can't read this chapter and not see that God cares about his people. That he's totally aware of what's going on. That he is sovereign over all things. That yes, he's allowing some things to happen. He's allowing Alexander the Great to go ahead and conquer the known world at that time so that the known world can have one language. Like, he's allowing all of this to happen, but he's very aware and he's very involved. This is the best part and my favorite part about Daniel chapter 8, even though I love the history. My favorite part is you read this and you can't help but see angels are discussing how long is God going to let this happen. 230 evenings and mornings. Like, there's actually a limit on how long God's going to let somebody like Antiochus Epiphanes run over his people. He is fully aware. There's different ways people look at God's providence, and most of them are incorrect. One very popular, especially 100-something years ago, and still is today, one popular view is that God, he really doesn't have anything to do with what's going on. Like, he's just an absent father. He's not paying attention. He just sort of, the deists would say, he wound up the world like a clock and just set it on the mantle and walked away, and he's just letting history unfold how it will, and he absolutely has nothing to do with anything that's going on. That is not true. That's not the picture you see of the God of the Bible, who's somehow absent and distant. But I would go ahead and say, I think this is how most people think. I think most people think God's just not, he's not aware of what's going on in my life. He's not paying attention to what's happening in my life. He's busy elsewhere, somewhere else in the galaxy doing something. I think some people have this mistaken view of God's providence, that he's just absent, especially when they suffer. Where are you, God? You seeing this? Are you even aware of what happened? Where that phone call I just had? Like, I think people, even though most Christians, I believe, would say, oh, I recognize that that's false, I think sometimes we default back to that. And we just live in that moment of God he's distant. He's not here. He's not aware. He's not paying attention. It's not an accurate view of God's sovereignty. Another mistaken one, was popular a few hundred years before that, but it creeps up now and again, is fatalism. That God has everything to do with everything. Like, they're everything to do with everything. It's all God, and it's not us, and He's doing everything, and we don't have to do anything, and it's all His fault that things happen, and He just has everything to do with everything. Fatalism. Well, it's just fate. It doesn't matter what I do, what I think. Like, it's just fate. And that's not true either. We always have to be careful when we say that God is sovereign, that God is providentially in charge, especially when we use theological terms. We need to be careful that we don't ever assign evil to God. The Bible says that He doesn't tempt anyone with evil. Like, He doesn't do evil. God doesn't do evil. Amen? Amen. He doesn't do evil. He's not responsible for the evil actions I do, you do, or other people do. The Bible is very clear that we are responsible for our own actions. Doesn't mean He won't use it. He does. He does all the time. But He's not responsible. You can't, as J.I. Packer says, you can't blame God for evil. In fact, Packer says something even more helpful. He says this about evil. He says God permits evil. He does. He punishes evil with evil. He does. He brings out good from evil. Absolutely, he does that. He said he uses evil to test and sometimes discipline those that he loves. He will use evil. One day, however, he will redeem his people from the power and the presence of evil altogether. Someday there will be no more evil. It's going to be a good day. No more evil out there. No more evil in here. No more evil in here. Can't wait for that day. Someday. So God doesn't have everything to do with everything, if by everything you mean it's God's fault. Like God cannot be blamed. The biblical way has always been to look at God's providence is that he has something to do with everything. Something to do with it. He's not hands off. J.I. Packer says he's hands on. He's hands on with creation. He allows, he permits, he causes. He's sovereign. He does concurrence often with our own decisions that we make. Like God is able to do this in a way that we can't even understand. The mystery of providence. I mean, who can understand that? But he has something to do with everything. So he will work all things out for the good of those who love him. Like that's the biblical position of it. He limits evil. I love Daniel chapter 8 for the description of what happens eventually to Antiochus and to any other antichrist that rises up against him. I love the description of verse 25 at the end of it. He'll rise up against the Prince of Princes, and he shall be broken by no human hand. Evil can rise and rise and rise and rise its ugly head time and time again, and it is no match for God. No match at all. No match. It will be broken. The plans and schemes of the enemy haven't changed. They haven't changed in thousands and thousands of years. We see here in Daniel chapter 8 that worship is assaulted. Bless you. Worship is assaulted. The temple, the temple is profaned. The sacrificial system shut down. The priests are all sent home. Like you see that worship is assaulted, and you see that truth is assaulted. One of the key verses here in our text in Daniel chapter 8, one of the key verses is that truth would be tossed down. Truth will be thrown to the ground. That's what happens. That's the assault of the enemy. Worship and truth. And his plans never change. But I'm here to tell you, never going to win. Never going to win. One of the truths that comes out of the book of Daniel is you know the end of the story. Jesus wins. Jesus reigns. Amen? And he does. Like he does. So that sometimes I've been known when I read books, like especially when I know what's going to happen, don't judge me for this, especially you, Darlene. Don't judge me for this. I'll read the end of the book first. Anybody else do that? It's confession time. Yes. Why do we do that? Because we want to know, like, if our favorite character died, like, what happened. So I will do that. And you're free to do that too if you want to. Just want to let you know you're free to read the end of it first. And I do that sometimes because I just want to know how it's going to end. Well, that's what this Daniel chapter 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, that's what it is. It's God telling us how it's going to end because he cares for us. He's aware of what's happening in our life. He's not distant. Or how one author said it, Daniel's God is not smugly watching from a distance. He is involved in our daily warfare against evil right now alongside of us. Those who assault us are at the same time assaulting our God. An amazing truth from Daniel chapter 8. You feel assaulted, they're assaulting your God. And you know who's going to fight on your behalf? God is. He is. So that's what we see. He's paying attention. He's not distant. He's not smug, watching from a distance. He didn't walk away from you. He's aware of whatever it is you're going through right now. He's always aware of whatever it is you're going through right now. You know what? He's aware of the things that you're going through right now that you are not yet aware of that you're going through right now. I mean, sometimes, like, something's coming your way and you don't even see it. Like, you have no idea it's coming. He's aware, and he cares. And you can trust him. That's the message of Daniel. The whole message of the book of Daniel is Daniel and his friends, regardless of how bad it got, regardless of whatever they suffered, regardless of what came against them, regardless of what was around the corner, regardless of what email they got, regardless of what text they got, regardless of what he said, she said, they said, you can trust God. It's like that old great song, he's got the whole world. Where? In his hands. He's got that itty bitty baby in his hands. He's got you and me, brother, in his hands. He's got you and me, sister, in his hands. And about 10 other verses after that. He's got the whole world in his hands. You can trust him. I read a story about how a shepherd in the ancient days would get fleas and other bugs off of the sheep. This is great. This is absolutely great. You need this today because some of you feel exactly how I'm going to describe it. This is exactly how you feel. This is what they did. Sheep had no idea, of course. So just pretend you're a sheep. You're going along, and I don't know where you've been hanging out, but you got fleas now. You're a flea-bitten, flea-ridden sheep. That's you. So what is the shepherd going to do? Well, in the ancient days, this is what the shepherd would do. He would take his staff, and he'd stick it on your horns, and he'd push you down into running water. That was all. I got a dog. I'll try this at home later. You push the sheep down into water on its back. So picture, whatever sheep noise makes, It's on their back, being pushed into the water, and then they held him down for like a half a minute or so, and would begin with the other hand to rub on him. What is the shepherd doing? What is the shepherd doing? Tell me what the shepherd's doing. Getting rid of what? The fleas, the bugs. What does the sheep think? It's the worst day ever. They did it not only once. They pulled the sheep back up, and just when the sheep was like, whoo, it's over, they did it once. Down you go. Man, if the sheep could only know. And this almost preaches itself, doesn't it? If the sheep only knew. God, you're letting this happen to me because I got fleas, I got dirt, I got grime, I need some help. Like, if the sheep only knew that the shepherd was expressing incredible care, that would have changed everything. But the sheep never knew. All it knew was, here comes the shepherd, here's another bad day. We can know differently. I don't know what you're going through right now. I don't know what you just came out of. I don't know what's going on. Whatever it is, you've got a God in heaven who loves you, who is your shepherd, who is going to guide and direct your feet. And he's going to take really good care of you. Daniel doesn't understand this. We get to the end of the chapter, and Daniel is sick to his stomach. He's like, I don't understand this. And then finally, he gets up and he goes back about the king's business. What he doesn't do is pretty fascinating. He doesn't start a book tour, go on talk shows, start going around Babylon. Hey, here's the visions that I had. No, he doesn't do that. He just goes about his business. But he trusts God. He doesn't even get to see his visions come true. It'd be hundreds of years later before it came true. So Daniel died in Babylon, not even seeing his visions come true. But Daniel died knowing God is trustworthy. He really does have the whole world in his hands. Right? Let's pray. Thank God for this amazing chapter. Father, we thank you so much for your word. Your word is truth. We thank you for the book of Daniel, what it reveals to us, just the accuracy of you revealing to Daniel what was going to happen and what that meant about how you cared for him, you cared for us. And so I pray for any of us right now who are going through it. We are going through it. We're under the water, and we're not even aware that you're washing the fleas off of us. We're struggling. We're struggling to breathe. We're struggling to move. We're struggling to understand why this is happening. Help us today. Remember, we can trust you. We can trust you because we know what your word reveals about you. That you are good. That you are great. That you really are picking up all the pieces of our broken messy lives and putting them back together. We thank you for that. So I pray that we would be greatly encouraged by your word. And I ask it in Jesus' name. We all said,